Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're digging into a pretty massive, almost unbelievable contradiction. On one hand, we've got a booming American economy, but on the other, there is a deep, agonizing financial pain being felt by millions of families right now. We're going to decode exactly how one country can create two completely different financial realities at the exact same time. All right, let's dive in.
Think about it. We keep hearing about the dazzling illusion of the all-time high. The stock market has hit its 23rd record high just this year alone. Home prices, totally soaring. And if you just look at the raw numbers, on paper, the country has literally never been richer. By all traditional metrics, we are living through one of the wealthiest moments in American history.
But here's the catch. When you talk to everyday people, a totally different picture emerges. Despite all those booming data points, consumer sentiment, how folks actually feel about their wallets, has completely collapsed. It's actually at its lowest level ever recorded. We're talking lower than the early 1980s recession, lower than the devastation of the 2008 financial crisis, and yes, even lower than the pandemic lockdowns. There is a stark, unavoidable disconnect between the bright green financial headlines and daily life.
So we really have to ask, how in the world is this even possible? How can the macro data scream boom while the average person feels a total bust? Well, to solve this mystery, we need to acknowledge something kind of uncomfortable. Both of these economies are completely real. The issue is that the American economy you experience depends entirely on where you stand.
Section 1. Who actually owns the market?
We hear about these massive rising asset prices all the time, right? But that wealth, it doesn't just rain down evenly on everyone. The trillions generated when markets climb land in very specific accounts. So to find out who actually benefits from these record highs, let's follow the paper trail across America's 134 million households. Because if you don't own these assets, the record highs aren't really happening to you. They're just a headline you scroll past on your way to work.
The data here is eye-opening. The top 10% of the wealthiest households in America own roughly 87% of all stocks. That leaves the bottom 90%, which is about 120 million households, by the way, splitting a tiny 13% sliver of the market between them.
And it gets wilder the further down you look. The bottom half of the country, 67 million households, the absolute working backbone of America, owns just 1% of the market combined. That's not 1% each, folks. That is 1% total split among 67 million homes.
Let's put some actual dollars to those percentages to see what it really means. For the bottom half, their median stock holding is only about $13,000. But for the top 10%, it's sitting around $600,000. So, if the market jumps 16% in a year, the bottom half gets a nice little $2,000 paper gain. But that exact same 16% gives the top 10% a massive $96,000 gain. It creates a wealth gap that is just impossible to ignore.
With the market up over 120% since 2020, the ownership class is completely pulling away. Families holding these appreciating assets are watching their wealth grow entirely on autopilot. They're completely insulated from the ground-level struggles because they literally own the assets that are being inflated.
Section 2. Inflation and the wealth gap.
Now, if you aren't part of that ownership class watching your net worth explode, you're likely among the millions depending entirely on a paycheck. And for this group, there's an invisible pay cut happening right now. Let's say you get a solid 3.6% raise. Sounds great, but if inflation is running at 3.8% over that same stretch, it literally eats that raise before it even hits your wallet. On paper, you earn more. In reality, you can afford less.
When you realize that overall prices are up over 28% since early 2020, the pain becomes incredibly real. It's really no surprise that 31% of Americans are calling the high cost of living their #1 financial problem right now, and a massive 55% are straight up saying their financial situation is getting worse.
This relentless squeeze is pushing people to some pretty desperate measures. Right now, about 6% of savers are actively raiding their 401k retirement accounts early, and they're happily taking the steep financial penalties just to get their hands on that cash. That is roughly triple the rate we saw before the pandemic. And let's be super clear here. They aren't cashing out for a lavish vacation. The breakdown of these hardship withdrawals tells a really grim story. 36% are specifically to avoid foreclosure or eviction. Another 31% are to cover sudden medical bills. Americans are literally draining their future just to survive the emergencies of today.
Section 3. The survival debt crisis.
So if wages are consistently lagging behind inflation and safety net savings are draining away, you have to ask yourself a logical question. How in the world is consumer spending still miraculously going up? Where's the money coming from? Well, the dark truth is that this spending is being fueled by the future. It's coming from debt. Americans are now carrying an unbelievable $1.25 trillion in credit card debt. And to make matters worse, the average interest rate on those cards, a punishing 23%.
And we really need to define what kind of debt this is. A third of folks carrying these balances say day-to-day expenses are their primary source of debt. This has birthed a terrifying new financial term, survival debt. This isn't about buying things you want. It's about financing basic necessities. It creates this dangerous cycle where tomorrow's income is already spent paying for yesterday's groceries.
Mike Croxon from the National Foundation for Credit Counseling hit the nail on the head. He noted, "We are seeing a disturbing shift from discretionary debt to survival debt. Because of this exact shift, a massive 61% of people with credit card debt have been stuck carrying it for at least a full year, with absolutely no clear mathematical way out."
But it doesn't stop at credit cards. The crisis has accelerated so much that buy now, pay later apps have just taken over. Over 90 million Americans use this short-term financing. It used to be for, concert tickets or a new couch. Now, more than a quarter of users say they use it just to afford groceries. Millions are literally splitting the cost of their weekly food into 4 separate payments just to make ends meet.
The ultimate proof of this underlying systemic crisis? For the bottom half of the country, that is over 65 million households, the personal savings rate has actually gone negative. That means they are spending more than they bring in after taxes. They're running a loss, sinking deeper into the red every single month.
Section 4. The new E-shaped economy.
For years, economists loved talking about a K-shaped recovery, winners pointing up, losers pointing down. But that just doesn't capture the modern American financial reality anymore. Our economy is actually morphed into a shape resembling the letter E. Picture a normal letter E. Now take the top bar, that top 10% of asset owners, and stretch it infinitely outward as their wealth explodes via stocks and real estate. Leave the bottom bar, the bottom 50% of wage earners, lying flat on the floor, drowning in negative savings and survival debt. Now take that middle bar, the middle class, and tilt it downwards. The middle 40% are losing their breathing room, slipping from premium stores down to discount retailers just to hold the line. When you add up all this massive wealth, sure, you get a booming economy, but that boom is almost entirely confined to the top 10%, who now hold 68% of the total net worth. The bottom half of the entire nation is left fighting for scraps, holding on to just 2.5% of the net worth.
Which brings us to our final thought. We are all living in the exact same country, but we are experiencing 2 completely different Americas. So the next time you watch the financial news and see the charts pointing up and to the right, you really have to look past the illusion and ask yourself, if the economy is booming, but daily reality for millions is slipping, when the next economic record is announced, who is it really for?